Welcome. Welcome to today's podcast. We are going to be talking about death of a manager. And my name is Cliff Watkin, and I wanted to welcome you to the last podcast of our 2022 year. Hopefully, many of you have either read Death of a Salesman or heard about it or seen the play and understand that it's a tragic story of a marginally successful salesperson named Willy Loman. And he's not really having a good time recognizing his past or his inabilities, and he tragically ends his life. The award-winning playwright Arthur Miller shows us how one individual can create a self-perpetuating cycle that expands to include other individuals, brings them into the drama that's occurring in their life. We see these similarities today in our workplace. Managers and supervisors are struggling to balance their workload, plus ensuring employees have adequate employee engagement. They're addressing employees' emotional health. They're pivoting to global and financial issues that are occurring in the company. It's a lot. And managers and supervisors are struggling to get out of the cycle, just like Willy. And Arthur Miller chose to highlight this, and he chose to highlight Willy's despair because it results from Willy's failure to achieve his American dream of success. Audiences might react to the situation as being sympathetic because Willy was only left with his opportunity to end his life. Other audiences might be reacting with disgust because why would Willy do this and desert his family and essentially take the easy way out? We look at this comparison because it's occurring today with managers and supervisors in the organizations. They are left to slog through their difficult work situation or leave for better pastures. And we have seen that evidenced with many leaving organizations today. So today we want to highlight, how did we get here? What is contributing to this tragedy? Who's accountable? And what are some really easy solutions you all on today's podcast can take away with you and bring to your organization? So I wanted to welcome two great colleagues of mine, Jake Herway and Alex Draper. Jake is the managing partner at Gallup, one of the managing partners at Gallup, and Alex is the founder and CEO of DX Learning Solutions. And for those of you who want to learn a little bit more about each of them, their bios are on our event invite that's on LinkedIn. And we want this to be an open conversation. We'll essentially start off with a bunch of questions and have a conversation between the three of us, but we would like you to join in the conversation as well. Because this is live, unfortunately, you can't do that, but you are welcome to put your questions in the chat. And we'll be looking at them all the time and be able to include them in the conversation. So you'll get a live, immediate response. So welcome, Jake. Welcome, Alex. I'm going to start off with our first question today. So Willy Loman exists with a tragic flaw. And it's with regards to how he perceives himself and his actions towards his family. Today, our managers are also suffering from this tragic flaw of how to function as a manager. Like I spoke earlier before, there's so many challenges that they have to focus on. And a good amount of managers are not really well trained to balance the management of their workload, plus the management of all of the employee issues. And this is all set upon them with not really a lot of resources to turn to. So I'm going to open up the conversation with, what do you think has contributed to this?
Can I ask Jake a question for all of us? Because you said the word manager. Jake, could you define the word manager so that we're all aligned before we get into this conversation?
Sure. I think it's important to understand that when we talk about manager, we're talking about people management. And that's the root of the challenge that we're having and have had for as long as managers have existed. if only people didn't have a brain, they'd be a lot easier to manage. We've heard that from the beginning of organized business. But a manager is anyone that manages people. The CEO is a manager of managers. Very often we make the distinction between leader and manager, but a leader is a manager also. And so when I talk about manager, and Alex, maybe it'll be the same when you do, we're talking about anyone who has responsibility over the performance of others.
Great, because I know there's some misconceptions of what is a manager, what is a leader, but for today's conversation, manager is anyone who has direct reports for all intents and purposes, whether you're a CEO or a supervisor, you are a manager.
Correct.
Fantastic.
So to bring the conversation back to the question, tell us what you think is contributing to this tragedy.
Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go macro level and see where Jake follows up. But I believe it starts with a systemic challenge that we have in this country and many countries, and that our systems are not set up for the benefit of those managers. Our managers are set up to fail. I think culture is a mirror of leadership. And leadership is one human being positively influencing another human being. Therefore, the systems that we create need to be so much so that a manager can actually positively influence those that they serve in a way in which hopefully both gets a result and improves people's well-being. We've just prioritized the result over people's well-being now for over 50 years. And I believe that's where things start, is when we are what we reward, when our systems and our processes are built to reward results. And as you said, Cliff, our brain wants to win and our brain wants to survive. And if that's what it's designed to do. So just think about that for a second. Managers are set up for failure from the day that they were born, because we're all born selfish. So we need to put systems and rewards in place that go against essentially what our brain is telling us to do. So I think it starts at the very top. Our executives and the corporations that they run need to create the culture which starts as systems and processes to set up managers for success. So it's a tough job from the start. Jake, what do you think?
No, I think it's a great point. There's an evolutionary barrier, in effect, is what you're saying, that we as human beings are not. I'll even take the strengths dynamic that Gallup proposes is the best way to develop exponential performance. We're naturally inclined to see the negative, see what's wrong, and as you were saying, see what's missing, and naturally inclined to survive, which is a scarcity mindset. But to win as a manager of people, you have to be able to tap in with your emotional intelligence and recognizing that collaborating with others' strengths is the way to win, recognizing that it's not about survival, but it's about collective success, and that it's about going into ambiguity, leaning into risk, going toward the fear. All these things that we evolutionarily are not programmed to do, much less the fact that a manager is expected to deliver performance, has her or his own performance objectives, and then is somehow supposed to carve out time. As you said, it's not rewarded or strict. Like, that was already a problem. Now you throw in virtual work where I don't see my people unless I make a direct effort to spend the 30 minutes to actually find time when they're free. I have to worry about their mental health and their overall well-being, not just how things are going at work. I have the economic headwinds and the uncertainties of what's going on in the world and the politics. People want me to have an opinion on everything from abortion to the police to you name it. It's a terribly impossible place to be historically. Today, even more so. It's a challenge.
And if you think about it, it's a choice. I have a group of 5 people here. I choose choice. I choose to do X or Y. If I say yes to this, I got to say no to something, and we can't do everything, as you said. It's so my question to, of course, us is: are we number one setting the environment up for managers to make the right choice, or to have the freedom to make the right choice? And Are we training them to make the right choices? So it's are we giving them the essentially a box to play in for all intents and purposes? Are we creating the environment for where they can say yes to? I'd like to have a one-on-one with one of my team members this week. I'd love to be able to give them an hour. Or are we creating an environment where they just can't do that? That their boss and their boss's boss demands a 20% increase in year-on-year results, otherwise at all costs. So it's just, yeah, it's a really tough place to be a manager in this world.
So we've outlined a bunch of different contributing factors to how we got here today. We've talked about outside external forces. We've talked about the construct as to how an organization is functioning and potentially setting people up for failure. And then there's other emotional issues and global and political challenges and so on and so forth, the pandemic. So all of those contribute. I just want to make sure that we really think very carefully before we move on to the next question, that we're not missing anything. Are there other contributing factors that you might have experienced in your work with clients dealing with this issue and helping them understand how to change their mindset around this that we just don't want to overlook in this conversation? And if there aren't any, great.
I'll add one more, and that's the matrix, how we work in a matrix where we're dotted line to everyone else, basically. So the formal authority structure doesn't exist, and thus the clarity of expectations we see in the research and obviously in our experience is not there as it is in a formal authoritative structure or hierarchy. And I think it's important within matrix work also to recognize the added need then to collaborate, understand the psychology and the decision making and the natural adoption process from awareness all the way up through becoming a champion of an idea. It's another complication that gets layered into the realities of today for managers.
So, Alex, go ahead.
Willy, quoting the Willy Loman exists a tragic flaw with regards to how he perceives himself. So I'll layer on just one more thing, which I believe is where it all begins. And Jake, let me know what you think about this. But to lead effectively, period. So leadership, as thank you, Brian. Drucker said that leadership is a subset of people management. I totally agree. So leadership is a subset of that. So leadership is to positively influence other people, which is a lot of what we're talking about today. Do I manage or do I lead? I make these choices. A lot of this comes from self-awareness or lack of it. And I think Willy had a problem with self-awareness, as I believe Tasha Ulrich in her empirical research says 95% of us think that we're self-aware, but actually only 10 to 15% of us are. Now that's a problem, right? There's what I perceive myself, like Willy, and there's what others see in me. And the bigger the gap between what I see in myself and what I believe and how others actually experience me, is the bigger the problem. And unless we solve that, and most managers have great intentions. I hope we agree on that. Most of us have great intentions, but of course the environment, etc. But even with great intentions, if I'm not aware of what's working, what's not working, how do I improve? And adding in, we're not very good at giving feedback, and in fact, we're getting worse at giving feedback now. The mechanisms that we use is terrible. So I truly believe there's a self-awareness problem. Many managers don't know that they're not great, or think that they're great. It's called a Dunning-Kruger effect, but actually they're not that great. And the systems and mechanisms that we've created to give them feedback aren't working either. So I just want to layer that in as well. And with great intentions, without creating awareness or self-awareness and perception versus reality, a lot of what we're talking about is even more of a problem.
Yeah, that's smart, Alex. I'll also say in my work, it's sometimes shocking, maybe it's because of my own hubris, how hesitant people are to claim their strengths. Say, this is what I'm good at, and own it and be proud of it and put it out there and say, this is what my contribution. There's this in many cultures, societal suppression of talking about yourself in that way, seen as bragging.
Aggrandizement.
Yeah, thank you. It's exactly the word I was looking for. And so then again, from a societal perspective, I think that is also another challenge for managers who have to be self-aware and claim what they're good at and claim what they're not good at in order to be at their best.
Just my last comment about the self-awareness. That's some of the work that Gallup does in helping organizations do assessments on individuals and identifying what their strengths are. But I think there's also one small piece to add to that self-awareness, and that has to do with some of our blind spots. And I think as we get older, our blind spots that might have shown themselves early on in life tend to grow and overshadow our ability to be self-aware, and learning how to figure out what those are and addressing them, I think is also a good or important step to take, so that you can say, okay, yeah, that is my blind spot, and therefore I cannot be successful as a manager. So I just wanted to add that little
Agreed.
comment to the conversation, and then just shift the conversation towards we focused a little bit on it coming from the top of the organization to essentially contribute to this path that managers are taking that is going to be essentially very difficult for them. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the top. So what specifically is happening at the top that leads the C-suite down the road of setting their leaders, or their managers and their supervisors up for having a difficult path? What is it that they're focused on, or what are the constructs that they have been educated on in how to lead an organization that's not letting them provide the environment for the managers to be successful?
Yeah, I'll start with what is now an old concept. Well, depending on how long you've been in this space, but the agility, the lean startup, this whole idea that you empower those closest to the problem to solve the problem. I think it's still not ingrained in our organizations. It's still a massive barrier to managers being able to be at their best, is them feeling handcuffed for whatever reason, whether it's a policy or the way a leader acts or reacts to certain actions or behaviors in the organization, or the way that they impose. There is still a bit of a expectation within organizations that leadership has the answers, leadership has the authority, and leadership has the wherewithal, and not that local manager. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I would call it an empowerment opportunity still exists in most organizations.
We're all familiar with the FedEx guy who had to get the package over the mountain in a snowstorm, and he rented a helicopter, right?
Right.
Talk about empowerment. You hear about that because it's just so few and far between, but I think it's not, an imperative, or it's not a conversation that leaders are having to say, I trust you and I am empowering you to solve this problem. And if you make a mistake, I'm behind you.
And if I could just interject, right, and if you do it differently than me, that's okay.
Right.
That's strengths. That's the strengths philosophy. It's okay that there are different ways to get a similar outcome. You don't have to do it the way the CEO does it. You don't have to do the way I do it. Let's find your best way and most authentic way to this outcome, and I will trust your strengths.
So if we're focusing on that, or we're allowing leaders, so let's just say we're the C-suite and we all agree, yes, we're going to empower our organization to make decisions on their own, and it doesn't have to be my way or the highway. What else is going wrong at the C-suite to start that are hamstringing the managers and the supervisors?
I just want to elaborate on the last piece, and I'll follow on from that, which is what stops us from empowering, which is ego. Let's just be quite honest in the fact that to get to the C-suite, a lot of things have to happen. So let's have a lot of empathy for anyone who's got to become a CIO, CMO, VP. To get to there is I'm sorry, but a little bit of selfishness to get there. It's just, there's very few jobs at the top, and it's a hard, long slog to get there. So there's an element of ego. We tend not to empower. Why? Because we're fear for our job. Well, if I let go, then they don't need me. Again, I'm going back to basic survival instincts of the brain. We're not designed to empower. We're not designed to let go. We're not designed to trust. We are designed to survive and protect myself. So many people don't empower just because of the fear of, well, what happens if I do? So just there's a little bit of empathy as to why we're not good at this, and especially at the C-suite. There's a lot more ego than you'll ever know up there, and we need to let go of that. There needs to be an element of, it's okay. I prefer 10,000 people survive versus me. But of course, to follow up on that one, Cliff, the challenge that we've got in the C-suite and what we're seeing in corporate America right now is they're incentivized on share price. They're incentivized on results. It's about the money. We live in America. This is a capitalistic society to which it's all about the money. So when you incentivize someone on results, then and that creates a short-term win. Really, people are about a long term, right? It's all about the long term, longevity, sustainability. But if you incentivize people, and especially the C-suite, on that short-term result, then they're going to get the short-term result above and beyond the people who get the result. And that's what you're seeing right now in terms of the people revolting, which is of course quitting and or being disengaged. To which I'm sure Jake has got a lot of data to support that. We're going backwards. We're not going forwards. So I would you agree, disagree with the sort of notion of we are what we reward? And if you want empowerment, then you need to reward empowerment. But that means you're going to have to suffer short-term loss because things change and they might not go the way that you want them to do, which means I tend not to let go because how I get things done makes the money. But of course, if you let go, you might get a little bit of a short-term hit, but long-term is you'll probably do things in a much better, more sustainable way.
I agree with your comment wholeheartedly about what's driving. I'm really glad you spoke about what's driving the decisions that the C-suite makes. It is really just about money, and it is really just about returning shareholder value or increasing shareholder value for the traded organizations. For the privately held organizations, they follow that same construct as well. And that's very, very important because it really sends a very strong message throughout the whole organization. Operationally, let's just focus on getting to our 10% growth or whatever it is the organization is choosing to do. Nowhere in that conversation is the human side. And so the conversation we had earlier, which was what's happening. Well, the managers are being set up to fail. They aren't provided the tools. There's so many other things going on. And now we're saying to them, you need to operate within an organization that's really just focused on me, the CEO. And so that I can get the organization to be where it needs to be financially. And there is no team in that. There's no team in that conversation or doing the good for everyone versus just doing the good for one.
And I know that both of you will agree with me. As much empathy as I have for that mid-level manager, I have for that top-level manager, right? To balance out, because the dynamic of the position, you've described the reality of it. And now here I am trying to do my best to deliver what it is that's expected of me, and I'm placed in this CEO or I've achieved the CEO position. It's an extremely difficult spot to be in, though. And we see examples, though, so I'll bring purpose and values into the conversation. We see examples of CEOs who prioritize purpose and define values based on who they are and who the organization is, as opposed to an aspirational value. And that's a key mistake that a lot of leaders that I work with have made in the past, is they've defined values based on who they want to be, not who they are. And then they get violated again and again and again and lose all credibility. Because the message doesn't get down to the frontline person that these are aspirational values. They're seen as, this is who we are. When you establish values then that you know you can honor, you know you're going to authentically, even subconsciously, without thought, live into, those are the kind of values that you want to claim as a leader. And then your purpose, the goal of the purpose is that it becomes the thing you lead with in your conversation. Because without profit, there is no purpose. Without money, there is no mission. Without cash, there is no company. So it has to be about the money. It has to, or you don't exist to serve your purpose. So the important thing is that you lead with purpose and profit comes behind it, that you lead with the company and cash comes, you lead with the mission. And so this is the difference. And one of the most practical ways that I've seen this behavior exhibited is, what do I do with my retained earnings? It's a key question you can ask the organization, the CEO, the CFO. What are you doing with your retained earnings? Every organization, ideally, is going to have a little something that they're going to decide what they're going to do with it. Do I put it back into? And where you put it back into will say a lot about whether you are authentic and real about your purpose and your values, or whether you're there to serve Wall Street.
I love Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage, to which it's about creating a culture of organizational health. And it starts with answering the question, why do we exist? To your point, Jake, purpose. Why do we exist is question number one. And question number two is, how do we behave, which is defined by values. So I think the important part of those two questions, why do we exist and how do we behave, which is defined by what do we value, because what you value will drive how you behave. And I think what you're seeing right now is we don't have the whys are not strong enough out there, and or they're not authentic, shall we say. And even worse is the values just become, I think 340 of the Fortune 500 have integrity as a value. But let's face it, we know full well a lot of them don't embrace that value. So we call that culture conning or culture debt, when you say one thing, but you see another thing. And I think that's the companies that aren't really putting time and effort into answering those two questions, not just answering them, but actually authentically and sincerely answering and demonstrating them at the C-suite and the senior leadership level, are the ones that will come out of this with their heads held up high, which again is long-term versus short-term. Mm-hmm. The output, of course, of organizational health and a very well articulated culture is going to be money. I mean, I'm sure Gallup and any research company has numerous papers and numerous data points to say the more happy, the more engaged, the more excited people are, the more money you'll make. And how do we excite people? We have a clear purpose and we have clear values.
Agreed. And I think we've identified two really important components that have gotten us to where we are today. Ways to focus on making changes in the organization. Those are really big in organizations to tackle those two very difficult topics. I thought I'd shift the conversation just a little bit to share a couple of easy things that organizations could do that maybe you folks have done with some of your clients along the way with some big changes, but some things that folks on the podcast could take away, easy, quick little things that will help contribute to maybe turn the ship a little bit. And before you answer, I just want to make a reminder that those online live, please let us know some feedback or some questions that you might want to share or ask directly of Alex and Jake. So some quick or easy things that you guys would like to share now.
I'll start, and this I have to be careful here because I want you to feel and know how authentic this is. But Gallup has what they call the Q12. It's been around forever. Some people debate it. There's a reason why I've been at Gallup for so long. And a lot of it is because of its science, and it's science-based. And this Q12 is 12 questions that really are a checklist. It's not a survey. You don't have to survey. It's a manager framework, both individually and for the team. And what I want to suggest is that we all start individually to ask ourselves, do I know what's expected of me at work? Do I have what I need to do my job right? Am I in a position to do what I do best? Am I recognized for the things that I think are expected of me and that I'm delivering, et cetera, et cetera? And if you Google Gallup Q12, these 12, I call them performance needs, are the same for every individual and every organization. Again, a manager, I defined it as someone who's responsible for someone else's performance. I'm intentional with those words. It's a little different than what might be in a textbook, but their performance is my responsibility. Thus, we're having the conversation about their engagement and their well-being, et cetera, because all of those are precursors to performance. But one of the simplest things you can do is just use this checklist, ask yourself, am I an absolutely yes on these 12 needs that I have? And if not, I need to go to my manager and have that conversation, or a peer, whoever it is that you think can influence your ability to get to an absolutely yes on these 12 needs that you have to be at your best.
Great suggestion. Thanks, Jake. Alex, any suggestions on your end?
I mean, there's a conversation to have here, which is depending on who you are. So if you're a manager or you're not a manager. So I think Gallup have the research to back up the fact that 70% of a team's performance is due to the manager alone. Is that right, Jake?
Correct. Well done.
So let's just talk about if you are a manager, which could mean you're a supervisor, you're a CEO, you're a mid-level manager, you're a VP director. So let's just put you in you're more than likely in a company where the corporation has values that are maybe writing on a wall or on a website somewhere. No one really cares about them, let's face it. So I always say culture is the worst behavior that you're willing to tolerate on a team. So think of a group of people, and the worst person, really everyone looks at that worst person and say, well, that's the culture. So anyway, you as a manager, regardless of whether you manage one person, 10 people, or 10,000, you can control the climate of your team. So I think regardless of what's going on around you, I'd like you to take ownership of the fact that your job is to send people home less stressed than when they came, period. That is your job. That is your obligation, which means all of you can do it, regardless of what's going on around you. Part of our jobs is to shield. So let me give you the something that I believe anyway, which is I truly believe that psychological safety can cure many of our challenges around the world. The ability to speak up about what's important and to be your true authentic self. So as a manager of people, then if I can create a safe place, because remember, the brain is designed to survive. It wants to feel safe, and it needs certainty to feel safe. And just think about what I can do with my team to create a safe place and to drive up engagement, because that's really what we're here to do, drive up engagement and create a lot of health. So I'll just give you a construct to think about, which is called care for your people. And think about science, because Jake said the words, science doesn't lie. So just think about this for a second. My job is to give those that I serve clarity, because my brain craves certainty. So if I give them a sense of certainty, they're going to feel more safe. My job is to allow them to have a sense of autonomy, flexibility, a say in things, because if I try and say things for them and I steal their autonomy, their brain doesn't feel very safe. So A stands for autonomy. A sense of belonging, a sense of worth of a character. So R, that sense of relationship. I need to build relationships with my people so that they feel safe. And equity, they need to know, and again, these are all linked to the Q12. It's great. There's a direct correlation between care and the Q12. Equity, that sense of, I feel a sense of fairness in this tribe. The distribution of time and energy and resources goes to where it's needed the most versus equally. And I feel safe. So just by caring for your people, by giving them clarity, by giving them autonomy, by building relationships and being equitable with your time, you can build a little subculture and work on psychological safety, because those are the 4 components of psychological safety. So you can take control. So if you're the 70%, you're a manager, but if you're the 30% and you're not a manager, right? So the team performance, it's a two-way street. We're all leaders. Can I just say we all have the choice to lead, which means all of you, regardless if you're a manager or not, you can still do something. You can ask for clarity if you don't have it. You can ask questions versus tell, or you can seek more flexibility from those if you don't have it. You can create some relationships and say, no, let's not have it. Let's just spend half an hour talking about our non-work stuff. You can ask for what you don't get. And we put a lot of onus on the manager. We all have a role to play in this organizational health. And we can ask for what we don't have. We can give what they don't have. So I want to just say it's a two-way street.
And I want to underscore that line. Help the manager, help your manager. That's why I say go through that list and go to them with your requests. And I think that's what you're saying, right, Alex? Like help them out. It's a tough spot.
Yeah.
I'll add one more just tactical thing, and that's the calendar. At a certain point, I don't know how else to say this in so little time that we have, but just own it. Be willing to say no and do the best you can to cut as many meetings as you possibly can. and then block that time to think and to reach out. And specifically, I would do that now. If I was in a workshop, I would have people pull out their phones, pull up their calendar, ignore the texts, ignore the emails. I know that's going to pull you away. Pull up that calendar, and I would block 2 hours every week, because to be a great manager, you have to think and you have to have relationships. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to help someone in their performance, or someone, period, without those relationships, following on that care idea. And so you block those 2 hours every week, and that's the hard work of a manager, to use that time to think about, where are my people? Where are they in their 12 needs? Where are we as a team in our 12 needs? Who can I reach out to? And then spend some time, just quick messages in those 2 hours. There's nothing more important than you can do. It's an unnatural, as we talked about from evolutionary standpoint, place to be, the manager. So you have to think. You have to engage your executive brain. You have to, or you'll end up where a lot of us do, drowning and burnt out. And so block that time and make it sacred.
Thank you, Jake. So Jamie was asking to repeat the statistic, Alex, that you had talked about. I think it's the 70% statistic.
Oh, I'll let Jake, who owns the stat, to repeat once again.
70% of the variance in a team's engagement is due to the manager. And what that means, variance means difference. So if there's a change, and engagement we define as someone being able to score high on those 12 and performance needs I just gave you. So we would equate engagement with performance. It's a precursor and predictor of performance. So another way of saying that is 70% of the change in your team's performance is directly tied back to the manager and what they can control and influence, and should control and influence in your team.
So that message you mentioned in your last comment about the blocking of the time and engaging with your team, it speaks to the comment or the discussion around accountability. And so I'd like to have a quick little discussion about accountability in this specific scenario as a manager, supervisor, or even a leader. Who is accountable for the situation that people are in with the managers having so much difficulty?
Can I start with the problem of accountability? and see where this conversation quickly goes. It's hard to hold someone accountable unless you're not crystal clear on what you're holding them accountable to. So let's just extrapolate this time conundrum. So big fan of System 1, System 2 brain, Dr. Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, one of the best books ever. If you want to read a book about how the human brain works and how we are not wired to be a leader, not one of us, there's a great book. But it's if the company values taking time to think, because as you said, Jake, right, to manage effectively is to spend more time thinking about what you're doing versus doing it. But yet our bias, one of the biases in our brain is we've researched about 165. The rush to solve bias is the brain's wired to just do. So if my brain's designed to do, it's not designed to think, as you said, then I'm just going to do. But if I'm doing, I'm not thinking, and I'm more comfortable doing than I am thinking. So that means we need to value thinking. We need to value white space. We need to value empty space on the calendar. But unless you value it, it's hard to hold people accountable to it. So does that make sense in terms of accountability, Cliff? Like it's hard to hold someone accountable to something if we're not actually clear on what that is.
So let's just say the expectations are very clear. The manager is given their directive, and they are now responsible for leading this directive. It's Directive X, and they've got a team of 10. Who is accountable for achieving Directive X?
I don't want to be semantic. Just give me 30 seconds and then I'll get off of the semantics.
Go ahead.
I've always liked the racing model, responsible, accountable. And sometimes people drop one or the other because they're not sure the difference. But when you're a leader, when you're responsible for someone else's performance, you're the accountable one and you got to own it, even if it's not your fault.
Yeah.
And back to this, like it's a team sport idea. We have to take personal ownership of our individual performance. That's the recommendation, to take that Q12 checklist and work through it for yourself. Don't expect your manager to be able to address all of those independently without your help. So as a leader, as a manager, I am accountable. As an individual, you are responsible.
Mm. And I just want to latch onto something you said, Jake, which is, man, managers aren't heroes. We're just human as well. We screw up. We do things wrong. We are not. We can't solve everything. And to your point, this is why, yeah, it's a team sport. Don't let them fail. They're going to, and they should own up to it. The buck will always stop with the manager. That's why we paid them more. That's why we promoted them. That's why they're there. They are responsible for the success of their team. And if we're crystal clear on that if they're not crystal clear, that's a problem, right? That's a conversation between them and their boss. So they need to be accountable for making sure they are crystal clear on the what, and the team needs to support them. But then you got to go, well, have they created an environment where the team wants to support them? And I think that goes back to that culture piece. Again, the manager and their team, that is a team and that is a culture. How are you creating a climate to where people would like to help you? They want to help you. Yeah. Are you asking for help, or are you letting your ego get the better of you? But to get, that's vulnerability. So there's your emotional intelligence, which is a challenge. It's the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more likely they are going to help you.
And think about it, Cliff, to your question. Think about that CEO who's on the earnings call. Who takes the blame? She does. Because ultimately, as a manager, it boils up and you're accountable all the way to the top. And the board holds that CEO accountable just as much as Wall Street investors do. So there is accountability, shared accountability all the way up to that, to the top. But each of us individually are responsible for our own performance. We can't sit around and blame someone else for our inability to deliver.
So just to summarize the semantics of the two words, accountability and responsibility, leaders are accountable to their directive and to their team, and it's a shared responsibility for those in the team.
Well said.
Okay, great. I'm glad we were able to clarify that because unfortunately, the use of accountability for individuals as an individual contributor is sometimes used when it's not really the right word. So thanks for clarifying that. Um, One question that I have as we now take the conversation from the 30,000 foot level to the 10,000 foot level, I'm the manager or I'm the supervisor and I have 5 people on my team. And let's just look at my management responsibilities in 2 buckets. I've got my duties and my directive, but let's call it 3 buckets, but we hold the duties and the directive aside. But what's left in the 2 buckets are compliance. And when I say compliance, how I am responsible for managing those people. I can't break any of the rules as a manager to manage them. I'm not going to say what any of those are. It's obvious. And then I'm also challenged with some of the emotional issues that come up with an individual. So people who have difficulty with their tempers, or people who have difficulty communicating effectively, or people who have difficulty with their emotional. They're having issues outside of work, and it's now filtering into work. So I'm just throwing that into, let's call it the emotional side, and then throwing emotional intelligence into it as well. So we've got now 2 challenges that a manager has to face in order to be a successful manager. My question is it the responsibility of the manager to be both, or to have to do both? Have to do the compliance and have to do the emotional side.
You mean just be human on the emotional side, Cliff? All
Say
the
that
things,
again?
just to be human for all intents, manage the humans and all the issues that we all have, because we all have them.
And to just clarify a little bit about what you're saying is that there are organizations that leave the human side up to human resources and not up to the manager. So when there's an employee relations issue, human resources addresses the issue and helps to navigate through the situation. And in many organizations that works well. And the compliance piece is up to the manager.
Yeah.
My question really is based on your experiences. Have you seen it work better where the manager is responsible for both? Or is it better to be separated? Or does it not matter? Does it matter depending on the organization? Just looking for some of your thoughts on that.
I'll start by saying the key question here is just I'm going to use what everyone else says, which is quality of managers. And then I'm going to cross that out and say preparedness of managers based on everything we've been talking about. I feel like that phrase quality of managers is so accusatory.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've been doing today is empathizing with the plight. And so the question is, do we have prepared managers? And that's taking a little bit of responsibility on us as leaders of the organization, as well as we talked about each individual, helping that manager be prepared for their responsibilities. How prepared are your managers to be responsible for the performance of their people? And based on where you land in that spectrum is where I would also place that division between compliance and performance responsibilities and the human side, the emotional needs, which we wouldn't be here on this call if we didn't believe that those are synonyms. If you can get people in the right place emotionally, you're going to get high performance. So it's right to, from our perspective and the research and experience, to put those in the same bucket.
What's stunning to me is that when you look at other, situation or functions that have a leader and a group of people that have to go in and do it, military, Army, Navy, you're not going to send anybody into battle if they're not prepared to do it.
Right.
Look at competitive sports. You're not going to put them on the field or have them get on the tennis court if they're not prepared to compete. Why is it that we're responsible, we as the leader of an organization are responsible for returning shareholder value, and we put people in our organizations who are not prepared to do it? Don't smile. I want an answer.
Mechanism, right? There's no answer.
No.
How long have, and I'm sure the thought has crossed each of your minds before, how long have people who have been in this space, at least with enough tenure, how long have we been calling for gap management? Generally accepted accounting principles, right? Well, how long have we wanted generally accepted management principles to be regulated, to be established?
Yep.
And that's what Gallup wants, right? That's a lot of what we do is establishing these statistics that define what's working and what's not working. It's a big part of the other side of the business that I don't touch as much. I'm in the consulting space of it, but that's what's needed. What you just highlighted is a gap, and many of us in this field long for the day and push for. I know Ulrich is working on something right now that is a regulated space. These are the bare minimum expectations of what managers need to be prepared for their role, so that the people go home and they treat their families kind, and they're contributing to their community, and they're productive at work, and our stock market is going up, and our economy is strong, and our military is prepared. And like, when you start drawing the lines between everything that gets impacted by that relationship between manager and direct report, you start to ask yourself, why haven't we regulated this a long time ago?
And we didn't have to wait for that to happen. I'll go back to an earlier conversation. The manager can regulate, you say compliance and humanness. Well, what if the humanness was compliance within your team? You can still prioritize the humans on your team. That's a choice that you make. Why wait for regulatory or federal minimum requirements for what it means to be a great, effective manager when you can do it right here, right now? And many do. And we've focused on the negative. I've come across thousands. I train 40,000 people. I've come across so many people who prioritize the people, have made humanness part of the compliance of their team, and do it really well. We just haven't done it at scale yet.
Yeah.
Why? Because we promote people on IQ and not EQ, and we don't teach EQ in schools. That's a problem.
Exactly.
Education here is not teaching the right things early enough, and our systems also aren't in place. We're promoting people based on their technical expertise and their ability to get results, not on their ability to manage the emotions and the humans on their team. But we can make it compliant, and a CEO and an executive team can do it, and I have seen that done too. There are many organizations out there that do put people first, period. And so we're starting to get there, just not at the speed that I'm sure many young people would like.
Yeah.
So we have a couple minutes left before the end, and I want to just turn a little bit more of the conversation to the positive and the solution side, and just take what Alex had said and just extrapolate that a little bit further, and focus on the issue of the employee or the manager who's sitting there with the decision. I'm slogging it out and I'm really frustrated, or do I quit? And I would venture to say our recommendation or our consideration would be to take what you have, and that's what Alex is saying, is to put the human first and stop putting the directive first. And that will bring your team together and allow you to feel more empowered and be able to achieve what you have to achieve, because you're putting the human first, because it's missing in the way you're functioning and you're not getting it from your manager. Comments about that?
Maybe add one more layer to the relationship. I would lead with purpose. And that's a way to lead with human first. So it's saying the same thing, but I'm just double clicking into human. Is if that purpose, if you lead with purpose and then the directive comes behind the purpose, you're automatically pulling the human in. among all the other things that you want to be doing. That
And so just Jake, to clarify, you're suggesting somebody who's facing this challenge right now would say, I'm going to go to my team tomorrow and I'm going to ask them, what's the purpose of what we're doing?
exactly right. Why are we here? Why did you take this job in the first place? What was it that excited you about it? What did you want before everything else came crashing in and clouded out the reason why you signed on the dotted line in the beginning? Yeah. And I love those workshops when I'm allowed to be a part of them, to be able to get people aligned on why we're here in the first place, what we want to be famous for, and what we're going to do differently as humans to achieve that human purpose. I mean, otherwise, it's a very individualized question. Do you stay or you go?
Mhm.
I mean, but that would be my recommendation. Yes.
And just to add the clarification that you mentioned earlier in the discussion, that everybody else can have their own definition of what the purpose is. It doesn't have to be a collectively agreed upon purpose for the team.
It doesn't have to be 100% the same for everybody. There has to be some alignment in why we're here.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So, yes, you can have different reasons and motivations for being there, for achieving a shared purpose.
Great. Alex, one last chance for a last comment.
Just take those two questions again. So why, the purpose, and then the human behind that. I just encourage clear why, clear purpose creates people to lean in. Perfect. Tick that box. Just remember that there's, for every human in your team, if nothing else, if you just pick up the phone every once in a while and just ask that person, hey, how are you doing? What's on your mind? What are you dealing with right now? And just have a non-work conversation and just do that alone and just sit there and listen. We were gifted with 2 ears and 1 mouth, yet we use the mouth more than the ears, and just the art of listening to those that you serve will go a long way. So if have a clear why and use your ears more than your mouth, I believe you'll be better than the average.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both for great conversation today. Felt like we got to say a lot of what we were preparing to say. So thank you very much. For those of you who would like to continue the conversation, the 3 of us are available. I think we make our profiles very public, and you can email us or message us on LinkedIn. Any other questions that you might be interested in or want to follow up from the conversation today. And so hopefully, as we started off talking about the death of a manager, we've been able to save the manager from dying and provided some cool, easy solutions to turn around today, but recognize that there are some fundamental issues in organizations today that require a big challenge to completely turn the ship around. So thank you. Appreciate your time and for your consideration and listening. And thank you, Alex, and thank you, Jake.
Thank you.